The story opens under the oppressive sun of a Georgian plantation, where the air is thick with heat, sweat, and the faint, lingering scent of earth turned over by forced labor. The cries of those shackled echo across the fields, creating a relentless symphony of pain and endurance. Amid this world of suffering, a child is born into chains, a boy whose very arrival seems marked by defiance. The midwife, wary of the overseer's glare, whispers his name as the infant cries, but the sound is almost drowned by the harsh clatter of metal and the rhythmic pounding of labor in the distance. Even in these earliest moments, the child's tiny limbs thrash with a strength that seems unnatural for someone so fragile, foreshadowing a lifetime that will defy every expectation placed upon him. The infant is not alone in his struggle. His mother, herself weary and hardened by years of servitude, cradles him with quiet resilience. Her hands, calloused from endless toil, soothe him with gentle motions, a fragile contrast to the harsh reality surrounding them. Her eyes hold a mixture of fear and pride, a silent acknowledgement that this child may carry the burden of their collective suffering while also possessing a spark that refuses to be extinguished. The narrative lingers on the sensory details of the moment, the clinking of chains, the whisper of wind through the sparse trees, the soft creak of wooden cabins, each element immersing the viewer in a world where hope and horror exist side by side. From the very beginning, the child exhibits an unusual awareness. While others of his age are lulled into submission by the constant weight of oppression, he reacts with keen perception, flinching at the subtle changes in his environment, the approach of a figure bearing a whip, the sudden hush that falls over the field, the tension in the bodies around him. These early signs of intelligence and instinctive caution are noted by those who watch over him, both enslaved and free, and begin to weave the earliest threads of a legend that will follow him throughout his life. The story emphasizes that the boy's defiance is not born merely of brute strength but of a profound psychological resilience, a determination to assert his presence in a world that seeks to erase him. Even in infancy, the protagonist's body seems to resist confinement. His tiny arms strain against the wooden crib, his legs kick with uncanny force, and he responds to touch with startling energy. These seemingly small acts are magnified by the oppressive environment, creating a sense of awe and foreboding among those who witness them. The narrative paints a picture of subtle rebellion, a child who refuses to remain passive, whose very existence challenges the social order around him. This tension between innocence and emerging power forms the emotional heartbeat of the opening, drawing the audience into the protagonist's life before he has even faced his first real trials. As the days pass, small incidents accumulate, each adding to the sense that this child is extraordinary. A spilled bucket of water becomes a demonstration of unexpected coordination, a playful tussle with another child reveals early strategic thinking and an instinct for self-preservation. These moments, seemingly mundane, are rendered with cinematic detail, emphasizing their significance against the backdrop of relentless oppression. Every act of physical or mental assertiveness is a seed of legend, planting the first whispers among the enslaved community that this boy may one day become something far greater than the circumstances of his birth allow. The narrative also explores the psychological landscape of the plantation itself. The overseer's constant surveillance, the unpredictable punishments, and the unspoken hierarchies create an atmosphere of pervasive fear. In this environment, every glance, every movement carries weight. The story emphasizes how the protagonist's early awareness and instinctive responses set him apart, marking him as a figure both remarkable and perilous. The tension is heightened by the contrast between his tiny, seemingly powerless body and the immense strength of will already visible in his actions. The cinematic tone captures the sensory and emotional extremes of this world, immersing the viewer in a setting that is as unforgiving as it is formative. Interwoven with these moments of physical prowess are glimpses of emotional depth. The child responds to the suffering of those around him, showing empathy and connection despite his own hardship. He forms silent alliances with other children, notices the unspoken signals of adults, and begins to navigate the complex social web of the plantation with instinctive cunning. This early social intelligence complements his physical abilities, hinting at a future in which both mind and body will become instruments of survival and defiance. The narrative lingers on these subtle cues, ensuring that the audience recognizes that the legend of the fighter will be rooted not only in extraordinary strength but in a profound understanding of human behavior. The section closes by expanding on the symbolic weight of the child's birth. In a world designed to suppress and erase individuality, the arrival of a boy who cannot be contained becomes an almost mythic event. The cinematic description emphasizes shadows stretching across the field, the clatter of chains, and the murmurs of those who sense something extraordinary taking shape. It hints at the life to come, a life defined by impossible feats, relentless challenges, and the uncanny ability to withstand every blow thrown by fate and man alike. By the end of the section, the audience is fully immersed in the protagonist's early world, emotionally invested in the infant whose existence alone begins to rewrite the rules of a cruel and unyielding society. This opening sets the tone for the epic story to follow, establishing the child as a figure of both hope and dread, someone who embodies the tension between innocence and emerging power, between oppression and extraordinary resistance. Every sensory detail, psychological insight, and subtle act of rebellion is carefully designed to draw the audience deep into the world of the fighter born in chains, setting the stage for the remarkable journey that will unfold over the next 10,000 words. The story deepens as it situates the audience within the sprawling, sun-drenched plantations of Georgia, where the oppressive weight of slavery seeps into every crevice of life. The landscape is a character in itself, a paradox of natural beauty and relentless cruelty. Fields stretch endlessly, punctuated by the wooden cabins of the enslaved, their walls weathered by time and toil. Tall oaks and pines cast long, wavering shadows over the earth, creating an eerie interplay of light and darkness that mirrors the moral contradictions of the society itself. The narrative slows here, allowing viewers to absorb the tactile reality of this world, the rough bark beneath fingers, the dry rustle of leaves underfoot, the oppressive heat that presses down with a nearly tangible force. Every sensory detail reinforces the tension between the land's serene appearance and the suffering it conceals, establishing a foundation for the story's psychological and emotional landscape. The fighter's family emerges within this setting, their lineage steeped in whispered legends of endurance, cunning, and resistance. His father, a man whose broad shoulders carry the weight of both chains and expectation, is remembered for feats of strength and cunning that were whispered about among fellow slaves as almost supernatural. His mother, gentle yet unyielding, embodies both resilience and strategic awareness, teaching the child through small acts of defiance how to navigate a world where every move is monitored, and every misstep punished. Their home, a modest cabin near the edge of the plantation, is a place of fleeting sanctuary, where stories of ancestors' survival are passed down through hushed tones and symbolic gestures. These stories imbue the young fighter with a sense of identity and belonging, while also framing him within a historical continuum of struggle and endurance. Local folklore begins to intertwine with these historical realities. Tales circulate of ancestors who could escape punishment through sheer cunning, who defeated stronger men in secret, and who seemed to possess almost preternatural intuition. The narrative emphasizes how these legends are not mere fantasy but a form of encoded survival knowledge, offering lessons in strategy, caution, and resilience. The child grows up absorbing these stories, their rhythm and tone shaping both his imagination and his instincts. The interplay between myth and reality blurs, creating an aura of mystery around a young fighter even before he has taken his first steps toward public recognition. Daily life on the plantation is depicted in painstaking detail, highlighting the relentless cycles of labor that define existence. Sunrise brings the harsh call of the overseer's whistle, the clanging of tools, and the coordinated movements of those forced to toil in fields under the unyielding gaze of authority. Work is not merely physical, it is psychological warfare, a constant reminder of power and control. The narrative dwells on these moments, emphasizing how the child's early environment is both crucible and classroom. He observes, absorbs, and learns. Every glance, every interaction, every punishment becomes a lesson in resilience, strategy, and human psychology. The cinematic lens captures both the oppressive monotony of daily labor and the small, almost imperceptible acts of rebellion that shimmer beneath the surface. The community of enslaved people is depicted with nuanced complexity, their lives intertwined through shared suffering, mutual protection, and covert resistance. Relationships form a delicate web, alliances are both practical and emotional, a mix of survival instincts and genuine human connection. Elders teach younger children lessons in caution and strength, using parables, songs, and covert demonstration to pass on the accumulated wisdom of generations. These moments provide the young fighter with a framework for understanding human behavior, conflict, and strategy, planting the seeds of tactical thinking that will later define his legendary confrontations. The narrative emphasizes the contrast between the overt cruelty of the oppressors and the covert networks of care, knowledge, and resistance among the enslaved, creating a layered, emotionally resonant portrait of survival. The psychological impact of the environment on the young fighter is explored in depth. Even as a child, he internalizes the duality of existence, fear and hope, oppression and resilience, vulnerability and latent power. The narrative captures his acute awareness of social hierarchies, body language, and subtle shifts in tone among adults. These observations shape his understanding of leverage, timing, and influence, lessons that will prove essential as his physical prowess grows. The cinematic description draws the audience into the inner life of the child, conveying both his intense curiosity and the careful calculation behind every movement. The section emphasizes that legend begins not merely with strength, but with perception, intelligence, and an understanding of human nature honed under extreme conditions. Superstitions, religious beliefs, and whispered fears permeate this world, coloring every interaction with an undercurrent of dread and awe. Plantation workers speak of omens, spirits, and ancestral guidance, layering a spiritual dimension onto everyday survival. The young fighter, absorbing both the practical lessons of the field and the symbolic wisdom of these tales, begins to internalize a complex moral and metaphysical framework. He perceives connections between courage and consequence, defiance and danger, reality and myth. The narrative emphasizes how this early blending of tangible skill and intangible awareness sets him apart from his peers, preparing the stage for a life in which physical and psychological mastery will intertwine. Interactions with the surrounding white community, overseers, and plantation owners are described with meticulous attention to tension, observation, and power dynamics. The child notices subtle gestures of fear, irritation, or amusement, learning to anticipate reactions and manipulate outcomes even before he understands the full mechanics of his own strength. These lessons are presented with cinematic pacing, highlighting the growing awareness that every environment, every relationship, is a potential battleground. Suspense builds as the young fighter navigates these dangerous dynamics with instinctual intelligence, foreshadowing the legendary confrontations and psychological resilience that will define his adult life. The section closes by emphasizing the duality of the fighter's existence, rooted in a historical reality of cruelty, injustice, and systemic oppression, yet already shaped by the faint glow of extraordinary potential. The lush, foreboding Georgian landscape, the intricate social webs of enslaved communities, and the whispers of ancestral wisdom all converge to create a crucible in which the young boy's identity, skill, and psychological fortitude are forged. Shadows lengthen over fields and cabins alike, hinting at both the darkness to come and the extraordinary light of defiance that will ultimately define his legend. By the end of this section, the audience is fully immersed in the world that nurtured the fighter's early development. Every element, the land, the family, the community, the whispered legends, and the harsh daily realities, is intricately woven to convey a sense of inevitability, that in this world of extremes, a child born in chains could rise to defy fate, forging a path that will become the stuff of legend. As the young boy grows, subtle yet extraordinary signs of defiance begin to manifest, capturing the attention of those around him. In the sweltering heat of the Georgian fields, where every motion is observed and every mistake punished, he moves with an instinctive awareness that sets him apart. At first, these moments are small, an unusually strong pull on a heavy basket, a sudden burst of speed that allows him to escape a reprimand, or a clever maneuver that avoids detection while performing grueling labor. Yet even in their subtlety, they hint at a resilience and intelligence that surpasses his age, earning him quiet acknowledgement among his peers. The narrative lingers on these seemingly mundane incidents, presenting them in cinematic detail that elevates them from simple survival tactics into early markers of extraordinary potential. The young fighter's interactions with other children reveal a natural ability to read people and situations with remarkable acuity. He instinctively gauges which classmates are trustworthy allies, which are rivals, and which pose threats, even in games that appear harmless on the surface. These early social maneuvers are depicted with careful attention to body language, facial expressions, and unspoken signals, emphasizing that his growing awareness is not merely physical but deeply psychological. The audience is drawn into a world where every glance and gesture carries meaning, heightening the sense that the boy is already learning to navigate a complex web of danger and opportunity with the precision of someone much older than his years. Even his simplest interactions with adults carry weight. Overseers and older slaves alike notice a certain audacity in his demeanor, a quiet refusal to be cowed by punishment or threat. A momentary defiance, a hardened stare, a sudden act of resistance, or a clever evasion of work, becomes a seed for whispered rumors among the plantation community. These acts are magnified by the harsh environment. In a world designed to suppress individuality, any hint of independent will is both remarkable and dangerous. The narrative emphasizes the growing tension between the boy's natural assertiveness and the systemic efforts to break him, illustrating the early formation of a legend born of both courage and necessity. The boy's physical abilities also become increasingly apparent, intertwining with his psychological acuity. He demonstrates bursts of speed, agility, and coordination that astonish even older children and adults alike. Playful contests of strength become more than games. They are miniature trials in which he tests his limits, hones strategy, and begins to understand the mechanics of leverage and timing. Every tumble, dodge, or improvised maneuver is rendered with cinematic clarity, allowing the audience to feel the tension, anticipation, and subtle triumph of these early contests. The narrative portrays these moments not as simple feats of strength, but as a synthesis of body, mind, and instinct that will later define his legendary confrontations. Whispers of the boy's unusual talents begin to circulate throughout the enslaved community. Songs, stories, and quiet conversations hint at his growing reputation, blending observation with elements of folklore. Elders remark on uncanny similarities between him and legendary ancestors, suggesting that a rare combination of skill, cunning, and resilience flows through his blood. These stories, half rooted in reality and half in superstition, reinforce the aura of inevitability surrounding the boy's development. The narrative emphasizes how legend and lived experience begin to merge, illustrating the psychological impact on both the protagonist and the wider community. Awe, hope, and fear intertwine in a complex emotional landscape. The narrative also explores the boy's internal world, focusing on his instinctive reactions to authority, danger, and injustice. Even at a young age, he exhibits a keen understanding of risk, assessing situations with both caution and boldness. He senses when the overseer's gaze lingers too long, anticipates moments of violence, and adjusts his behavior accordingly. These internal calculations, paired with emerging physical skill, demonstrate the early integration of strategy, resilience, and psychological acuity. The audience is drawn into the protagonist's perspective, experiencing the tension and heightened awareness that define his formative years. Conflict begins to escalate as the boy tests the limits of authority. Small acts of defiance, refusing to comply immediately, responding with calculated words or gestures, or engaging in physical resistance, provoke reactions that oscillate between punishment and grudging admiration. The narrative highlights the interplay between courage and consequence, emphasizing the delicate balance the boy must navigate. Each act of defiance strengthens his skill set and reputation while also increasing the stakes, building suspense and anticipation for the larger challenges to come. The psychological impact on observers is also explored in depth. Fellow children experience awe and inspiration, seeing in him a model of courage and ingenuity. Adults, both enslaved and free, respond with a mix of fear, irritation, and fascination. This complex web of reactions underscores the boy's growing significance within the plantation ecosystem. The narrative portrays these dynamics with cinematic tension, emphasizing the emotional resonance of every interaction. By focusing on both internal and external reactions, the story builds a sense of momentum. The boy is no longer merely surviving, he is beginning to command attention, influence, and respect through his early signs of defiance. The section concludes by highlighting the foundational qualities that will define the protagonist's life: resilience, intelligence, perceptive skill, and a refusal to submit. The boy's early experiences establish a pattern of calculated defiance, strategic observation, and physical mastery, setting the stage for the extraordinary confrontations and legendary reputation that will follow. The cinematic description underscores the tension between innocence and emerging power, portraying a world in which a child, born into chains, begins to assert a remarkable autonomy over both his body and his destiny. Shadows lengthen across the fields, whispers grow in the cabins, and the audience is left with a vivid sense of anticipation. The first sparks of a legend are igniting, promising feats that will defy the brutal reality of his world. The boy, now approaching adolescence, begins to face his first true confrontations with the rigid power structures surrounding him. These encounters are no longer minor displays of defiance, they are deliberate tests of strength, skill, and cunning against both peers and authority figures. Each moment is imbued with a heightened sense of danger, as even a small miscalculation could result in punishment or injury. The narrative focuses on the meticulous choreography of these early clashes, depicting them in vivid cinematic detail. Every movement, every shift in stance, and every flash of instinct is highlighted, allowing the audience to feel the tension, anticipate the outcome, and grasp the extraordinary capabilities emerging within the young fighter. In these first confrontations, the protagonist learns to combine his physical gifts with mental strategy. When confronted by older children or overseers, he does not rely solely on strength, he gauges their movements, anticipates reactions, and uses the environment to his advantage. A fallen bucket, a loose plank, or the angle of sunlight can be leveraged in ways that would escape the attention of others. These early lessons in improvisation and tactical thinking are crucial, as they teach him that survival is rarely about brute force alone. The narrative emphasizes the interplay between calculation and instinct, establishing a core theme of the fighter's life: mastery of both body and mind under extreme pressure. The social dynamics of the plantation begin to shift subtly as a result of these confrontations. Fellow children watch in awe, forming silent allegiances or cautious rivalries based on the boy's demonstrated prowess. Among adults, reactions vary: some express grudging respect, others respond with suspicion, and a few feel threatened by the uncanny combination of skill, perception, and fearlessness he exhibits. The narrative highlights how the boy's early confrontations are not isolated events, they reverberate through the community, altering relationships, creating tension, and planting the seeds of a reputation that will grow into legend. Each victory carries consequences, each misstep a reminder of the precariousness of life in a world ruled by cruelty. These early duels and conflicts are described with cinematic intensity, capturing both the physicality and psychological tension of each encounter. A scuffle over stolen food becomes a test of agility and endurance, a dispute over a game escalates into a battle of wits and strength, and a confrontation with an overseer is resolved not through submission, but through clever manipulation of timing and force. The narrative emphasizes how even minor victories carry symbolic weight, reinforcing the boy's growing sense of agency and self-worth. His defiance begins to inspire others while simultaneously drawing the scrutiny and ire of those who seek to maintain control, creating a delicate balance of admiration and danger. The psychological dimension of these confrontations is explored in depth. The protagonist experiences a complex blend of fear, exhilaration, and determination. Each encounter tests not only his physical abilities but his emotional resilience, his capacity for strategic thinking, and his understanding of human behavior. The narrative allows the audience to inhabit his perspective, experiencing the heightened awareness, the rapid decision-making, and the adrenaline-fueled clarity that define these early trials. By immersing the viewer in both the external and internal aspects of confrontation, the story builds suspense and deepens emotional engagement, making each encounter feel immediate and consequential. One of the most significant aspects of these early confrontations is their role in shaping the boy's identity. Each encounter reinforces his understanding of personal limits, the mechanics of power, and the consequences of defiance. He begins to internalize the idea that survival requires more than physical ability, it demands psychological acuity, foresight, and the courage to act decisively in the face of risk. The narrative emphasizes the gradual transformation from a child reacting instinctively to a young fighter who anticipates challenges, evaluates options, and executes strategies with precision. This evolution is portrayed as both inevitable and extraordinary, a testament to the shaping force of adversity in his formative years. As word spreads about these confrontations, the line between reality and emerging legend begins to blur. Fellow slaves recount tales of his victories in hushed tones, adding embellishments that amplify his prowess and courage. Even subtle victories, such as evading an overseer's punishment through clever maneuvering or outmatching older children in contests of strength, take on almost mythic qualities in retellings. The narrative emphasizes how folklore and observation intertwine, reinforcing the young fighter's growing reputation while also adding layers of psychological pressure. He becomes increasingly aware of the expectations and scrutiny of his community, learning to navigate both admiration and envy with careful calculation. Conflict escalates as the boy's abilities attract attention from more powerful opponents. Minor incidents evolve into deliberate tests orchestrated by those who wish to assert dominance, challenge his growing reputation, or punish perceived insolence. Each encounter carries higher stakes, with the potential for severe physical harm or social repercussions. The narrative describes these moments with a focus on tension, timing, and strategy, creating a cinematic rhythm that mirrors the unpredictability of life under constant threat. Every dodge, strike, and calculated retreat is laden with both immediate consequence and long-term significance, reinforcing the intensity of the protagonist's emerging path. The section also explores the broader psychological effects of these confrontations on the community. The boy's victories inspire hope and admiration among enslaved peers, creating a sense of shared possibility and subtle resistance. Simultaneously, they generate fear and unease among authority figures, who begin to perceive the child not merely as a troublemaker but as a potential threat to established order. The narrative captures this tension, highlighting the duality of admiration and anxiety that follows him, reinforcing the idea that the young fighter's defiance is already reshaping social dynamics on the plantation. By the end of this section, the audience is fully immersed in the early battles that define the protagonist's formative years. The cinematic depiction of physical and psychological confrontation emphasizes both the danger and the exhilaration of these encounters, establishing a foundation for the legendary feats to come. The narrative leaves the audience with a clear sense of anticipation, showing that the young boy is not simply surviving within the brutal confines of slavery, he is learning, adapting, and beginning to shape a reputation that will challenge the limits of expectation and human endurance. Shadows stretch across the fields, whispers of defiance echo in the cabins, and the boy emerges as a figure whose courage and cunning are already leaving an indelible mark on the world around him. As the young fighter's exploits grow, whispers begin to circulate through the plantation and surrounding communities, transforming small acts of defiance into stories of almost mythic proportions. These tales travel quietly, passed from one enslaved person to another, growing in detail and intensity with each retelling. A minor scuffle becomes a legendary duel, an escaped punishment becomes evidence of preternatural cunning, and the boy himself starts to take on a symbolic weight far beyond his years. The narrative explores how these rumors serve multiple purposes. They inspire hope among the oppressed, strike unease into the hearts of overseers, and blur the line between reality and legend. Every whispered account contributes to an atmosphere of suspense and awe, creating an emotional landscape in which fear, admiration, and fascination coexist. The community's response to the young fighter is complex and layered. Among the enslaved, he is celebrated not openly, but in subtle ways, a nod of respect, a whispered warning to outsiders, or a quiet smile shared with those who understand the stakes. These gestures reinforce solidarity and the shared understanding that acts of defiance, however small, are a form of resistance. Elders recount similar stories from previous generations, drawing parallels between the boy and ancestors whose cunning, strength, or courage allowed them to survive against overwhelming odds. The narrative emphasizes that this is more than folklore, it is a living strategy, a means by which knowledge, hope, and inspiration are transmitted across generations. At the same time, the whispers provoke fear and suspicion among those in positions of power. Overseers and plantation owners begin to notice the boy's emerging reputation, and subtle efforts are made to undermine him. Tasks are assigned with punitive intent, movements are closely monitored, and the boy is forced to navigate an increasingly hostile environment. The tension between the boy's growing abilities and the attempts to suppress them escalates the stakes. The narrative details these dynamics with careful attention to psychological pressure. The young fighter must constantly weigh risk against opportunity, learn to read intent, and adapt to threats that are both overt and hidden. Superstition and rumor begin to intertwine, giving the boy an almost supernatural aura. Some enslaved individuals speculate that his strength and cunning are gifts from ancestral spirits, while others see omens in his successes, interpreting them as signs of destiny. These beliefs create a layered emotional landscape, combining reverence with fear and fascination. The narrative highlights how this mix of perception, legend, and reality intensifies the boy's psychological environment, teaching him that power is as much about perception and reputation as it is about skill and strength. He begins to understand that legend can protect him, manipulate his adversaries, and amplify the impact of his actions without the need for constant physical demonstration. The boy's own understanding of resistance evolves during this period. He recognizes that defiance is not limited to physical confrontation, subtle maneuvers, clever manipulation of expectations, and strategic silence can be just as powerful. The narrative explores scenes in which he uses these tactics to outwit adults, evade punishment, or influence peers. Each success reinforces his growing confidence and awareness, while also cementing the idea that psychological acuity is as vital as physical prowess. The audience witnesses the development of a young mind attuned to the nuances of power, strategy, and influence, setting the stage for the greater confrontations and legendary victories to come. The storytelling emphasizes contrast, the innocence of childhood against the harsh reality of systemic cruelty, the fragility of a small body against the impact of a growing reputation, and the simplicity of play against the complexity of survival. A minor playground altercation, for example, becomes a microcosm of larger power dynamics, with the boy emerging not only unscathed but elevated in status among his peers. These moments, described in cinematic detail, underscore the slow, careful accumulation of skill, strategy, and reputation that transforms a child into a figure of both hope and cautionary awe. Tension escalates as the whispers reach those outside the immediate community. Plantation owners, driven by concern for maintaining control, begin to interpret stories of the boy's feats as potential threats to the social order. Rumors are examined with suspicion, behaviors are scrutinized for signs of rebellion, and minor victories are reframed as dangerous defiance. The narrative explores this feedback loop, showing how perception can amplify reality, creating a cycle in which the boy's legend fuels both fear and respect. Cinematic tension builds as the audience witnesses the increasing stakes. Each act of defiance carries consequences that extend far beyond the immediate moment. Within this environment, the boy also experiences the psychological weight of expectation. The stories circulating about him create pressure, inspiring both pride and anxiety. He learns to navigate these complex emotions, balancing personal survival with the symbolic role he has begun to occupy. The narrative examines the nuanced impact of reputation on behavior, illustrating how the young fighter internalizes both the admiration and scrutiny directed at him, using it to refine strategy, build resilience, and cultivate the awareness that will define his later confrontations. The section also delves into the community's collective psychology, highlighting how stories of resistance serve as a form of covert empowerment. Elders, peers, and sympathetic adults participate in a delicate dance, nurturing the boy's abilities, sharing cautionary guidance, and ensuring that acts of defiance do not provoke retaliation that could endanger the wider group. The narrative emphasizes that the growth of the boy's reputation is intertwined with communal survival strategies, creating a layered social tapestry in which legend and lived experience reinforce one another. By the end of this section, the audience sees the young fighter emerging as both a symbol and a strategic actor within his world. His early confrontations, clever maneuvers, and growing reputation have transformed him from an extraordinary child into a figure whose presence challenges authority and inspires hope. Shadows of fear and admiration stretch across the plantation, whispers circulate like sparks in dry grass, and the young boy stands at the threshold of mastery, poised to translate reputation into action. The narrative closes this chapter of his life emphasizing the tension, suspense, and slow-burn legend that will carry him forward, setting the stage for the discipline, training and mastery that will define his legendary adult feats. As the young fighter moves from boyhood into his early teens, his extraordinary potential begins to crystallize through disciplined training and careful observation. The narrative shifts to depict his deliberate cultivation of both physical prowess and mental acuity, showing that his legendary abilities are not merely instinctual but forged through purposeful effort. Daily routines, undertaken in secret or under the guise of routine labor, become a crucible for strength, endurance, and strategy. The cinematic lens captures the intensity of his practice, the strain of muscles under repetitive movement, the focus in his eyes as he studies technique, and the quiet satisfaction of incremental progress. Each detail underscores that mastery is born not only from talent but from persistence, discipline, and a deep understanding of the environment in which he exists. The boy's training is multifaceted. Physical conditioning is combined with tactical exercises designed to enhance agility, speed, and resilience. He improvises tools and makes use of the landscape, transforming ordinary objects into instruments for skill development. Fallen branches become sparring sticks, uneven terrain serves as resistance training, and the thick underbrush of the woods provides both obstacle and camouflage. The narrative emphasizes the cinematic beauty of this process, framing each movement with a sense of choreography and purpose. The young fighter's awareness of his surroundings grows alongside his physical strength, illustrating the inseparable connection between body, mind, and instinct that defines his future mastery. Mentorship, both formal and informal, plays a critical role in the boy's development. Elders in the enslaved community, recognizing his potential, provide guidance in the form of tactical advice, subtle demonstrations, and stories imbued with practical lessons. These interactions are steeped in wisdom and history, connecting the boy to a lineage of survival and resistance. Observing adult fights or disputes, he analyzes strategy, timing, and psychology, internalizing lessons that he will later apply to his own confrontations. The narrative emphasizes the dual role of mentorship, imparting knowledge while also teaching restraint, caution, and the importance of understanding consequences in a world where miscalculation can be deadly. The process of mastery is not linear, it is punctuated by failure, frustration, and moments of doubt. The narrative delves into the psychological challenges of training, portraying scenes in which the boy pushes beyond his limits, struggles to execute complex maneuvers, or faces the consequences of misjudgment during sparring. These moments are rendered with cinematic intensity, allowing the audience to experience the tension, disappointment, and resilience required to overcome obstacles. Each setback is framed not as defeat but as an opportunity for learning, reinforcing the theme that true mastery emerges from persistence and the careful integration of experience. Strategic thinking becomes an integral component of the boy's training. He studies patterns of movement, predicts opponents' reactions, and develops contingency plans for every scenario. This mental discipline is portrayed alongside physical training, emphasizing the inseparability of mind and body in his development. Scenes illustrate his growing ability to anticipate threats, exploit weaknesses, and make split-second decisions under pressure. The narrative conveys the cinematic tension of these exercises, showing how each calculated risk and observation strengthens not only skill but confidence, self-awareness, and an almost instinctual grasp of combat dynamics. Training is further complicated by the environment in which the boy exists. The constant presence of overseers, the threat of punishment, and the need to maintain secrecy add psychological weight to every exercise. The narrative captures this tension with attention to sensory detail, the rustle of leaves signaling an approaching figure, the distant whistle of an overseer, the interplay of light and shadow across the terrain. These elements transform ordinary training into a high-stakes rehearsal for real confrontations, reinforcing the connection between preparation and survival. Each exercise becomes a blend of discipline, strategy, and instinctual awareness, honing the young fighter into a formidable force under the harshest conditions. Physical training is complemented by the development of resilience and pain tolerance. The narrative details exercises designed to push the body to extremes, long runs through uneven terrain, sparring sessions with older or stronger individuals, and repetitive drills that test both stamina and focus. The cinematic portrayal emphasizes the strain, sweat, and small triumphs that mark each session. By enduring discomfort and overcoming physical limitations, the boy develops not only strength but confidence in his capacity to face challenges that would overwhelm ordinary individuals. This endurance training becomes a foundation for the legendary feats that will define his later life. Social dynamics also influence his mastery. The young fighter engages with peers in controlled contests, learning negotiation, timing, and the psychological nuances of competition. These interactions teach him subtle lessons about hierarchy, respect, and perception, further refining his ability to anticipate behavior and manipulate outcomes. The narrative emphasizes that his growth is not isolated, it is embedded within a social ecosystem where observation, adaptation, and strategy are continuously tested. These experiences contribute to the development of both skill and reputation, reinforcing the slow accumulation of abilities that will eventually mark him as extraordinary. The narrative also explores the philosophical and psychological dimensions of mastery. The boy internalizes lessons about discipline, patience, and the value of observation, forming a mental framework that integrates strategy, ethics, and self-awareness. He begins to understand that true power is not about dominating others recklessly, but about precision, timing, and judicious use of strength. This conceptual understanding is portrayed with cinematic subtlety, showing quiet moments of reflection amidst rigorous training, emphasizing that mastery encompasses more than skill, it requires insight, restraint, and an understanding of the consequences of action. By the end of this section, the young fighter emerges as a disciplined, strategic, and nearly unstoppable force, blending physical prowess with psychological acuity. The narrative conveys the full weight of his transformation, from an instinctive, defiant child into a figure whose abilities, preparation, and mental discipline mark him as exceptional. Shadows stretch across training grounds, whispered observations from peers underscore growing respect, and the cinematic tension of anticipation suggests the coming tests that will cement his legendary reputation. The audience is left with a sense of inevitability, the fighter is prepared, poised, and ready to face challenges that will test the limits of human endurance and skill. Summary: the boy's reputation had grown far beyond the small arena where he first fought. Now, men came from distant towns and plantations to challenge him, each hoping to be the one who could finally bring him down. The narrative describes each fight in painstaking cinematic detail, the roar of the crowd, the dust swirling around the combatants, the sweat and blood glistening under the harsh sunlight, and the sharp clinks of chains as he moved. Each opponent is unique, some rely on brute strength, others on cunning strategy, forcing the boy to constantly adapt, demonstrating a mastery over both body and mind that seems almost supernatural. Between fights, tension builds as he trains tirelessly in secrecy, healing injuries, and mentally preparing for the next encounter, often reflecting on the weight of expectation pressing upon him. Viewers see not only the physical toll but also the psychological strain, isolation, fear of betrayal, and the relentless pressure to survive while maintaining the legend. Scenes explore the boy's interactions with allies and rivals, illustrating the complex web of loyalty, envy, and superstition that surrounds him. The section emphasizes the contrast between the boy's growing myth and the harsh reality of his vulnerability, heightening suspense as each victory becomes harder to achieve. By the end, the boy has defeated 37 men in succession without falling once, solidifying him as both a hero and an enigma, leaving spectators awed and unsettled. The narrative now enters one of the darkest and most enigmatic phases of the young fighter's life, a period marked by sudden upheaval, escalating danger, and a gradual withdrawal from the world that once bore witness to his remarkable feats. The plantation, once the stage for his defiance and mastery, grows increasingly hostile. Rumors of his strength and cunning, which had circulated with awe and admiration, begin to provoke targeted attempts to neutralize him. Overseers and other authority figures, threatened by the psychological and physical impact he has on the community, orchestrate a series of punitive strategies designed to test, intimidate, and ultimately break him. The cinematic description highlights the tension of these confrontations, the oppressive heat of the sun mirrored by the oppressive weight of social control, the sharp clatter of tools against the soil echoing like a warning, and the wary glances exchanged between those who fear reprisal and those who protect him. Every scene underscores the precarious balance between survival and legend, as the fighter navigates a web of escalating threats with caution and instinct. As the young man contends with increasingly organized opposition, the psychological strain becomes apparent. The constant scrutiny, surveillance, and strategic targeting weigh heavily on his mind, testing not only his physical capabilities but also his mental resilience. The narrative delves into his internal calculations, anticipating attacks, recognizing patterns of aggression, and strategizing his next moves to maintain agency within an environment designed to strip him of it. The tension between action and reflection is emphasized, showing that his legendary survival is not simply a matter of strength but of acute awareness and deliberate calculation. Scenes depict him observing subtle shifts in the behavior of adversaries, reading the intent behind every gesture, and using both environment and social insight to remain steps ahead. These depictions create a cinematic sense of suspense, immersing the audience in the relentless mental and emotional labor required for continued resistance. Physical confrontations intensify during this period. The young fighter faces coordinated challenges, from multiple assailants seeking to overwhelm him to orchestrated traps designed to exploit even minor weaknesses. Each encounter is rendered with meticulous detail, highlighting not only his skill and ingenuity but the escalating stakes of survival. A clash that might have once been a simple contest of strength now carries the weight of life-or-death consequences, and the narrative captures the sweat, strain, and precise calculation required to emerge unscathed. These encounters reinforce a central theme, that legend and survival are inseparable, forged through the crucible of repeated confrontation, relentless pressure, and unwavering resilience. Amid the increasing dangers, a sense of isolation begins to envelop him. Allies who once supported his defiance are removed from the environment, through relocation, punishment, or death, leaving him to navigate the heightened threats largely alone. The narrative emphasizes the psychological impact of solitude in the context of ongoing conflict. The need for vigilance becomes constant, and even minor errors carry catastrophic potential. Scenes depict him moving cautiously through familiar landscapes, aware that every shadow might conceal an adversary, every footstep might betray his location. The cinematic portrayal underscores the tension between his previous dominance and the new vulnerability imposed by isolation, heightening suspense and deepening emotional engagement with the audience. The social and symbolic dimensions of the young fighter's collapse are explored in detail. While his earlier feats had inspired awe and hope among the enslaved community, his growing absence from public confrontations creates uncertainty. Rumors swirl, some claim he has been defeated, others assert that he has vanished by choice, and still others suggest that he has been captured or killed. The narrative captures the ambiguity of this period, emphasizing the interplay between reality and perception. His absence transforms him into a spectral presence, a legend that looms over both the oppressed and the oppressors. This tension between the seen and unseen amplifies the psychological impact of his life and actions, reinforcing the eerie resonance of his legend even in apparent retreat. The narrative also delves into the fighter's own strategies during this vanishing phase. Recognizing the limits of confrontation and the escalating costs of continued visibility, he adapts by leveraging stealth, environmental awareness, and deception. The story describes in cinematic detail how he moves through the landscape with calculated precision, navigating hidden paths, using shadows and natural obstacles to obscure his presence, and exploiting the predictability of adversaries to maintain freedom. Each maneuver is both survival tactic and symbolic assertion of agency, highlighting his ongoing mastery of both mind and body even as he withdraws from public view. These depictions underscore that withdrawal does not signify defeat, rather, it is a strategic recalibration in the face of overwhelming opposition. The psychological complexity of this period is further intensified by moments of reflection and internal conflict. The young fighter contemplates the cost of his life of defiance, weighing the benefits of legend and survival against the toll on his mind, body, and relationships. Scenes illustrate the solitude of nights spent in concealment, the quiet observation of a world that continues to operate without his intervention, and the emotional weight of responsibility for those who still look to him for inspiration or protection. The narrative portrays these introspective moments with cinematic care, using sensory detail, the crackle of fire in a hidden grove, the rustle of leaves underfoot, the distant hum of the plantation at night, to immerse the audience in the tension between internal reflection and external vigilance. The vanishing point becomes not only a physical retreat but a symbolic threshold. By gradually removing himself from direct confrontation and public visibility, the young fighter achieves a form of psychological liberation while simultaneously amplifying his mystique. The narrative emphasizes the duality of this act. On one hand, it reflects survival instincts honed through years of strategic thinking and physical mastery; on the other, it allows his legend to grow beyond empirical observation, fueled by rumor, folklore, and imagination. Cinematic depictions illustrate the interplay of light and shadow, silence and sound, presence and absence, creating a palpable atmosphere of suspense, reverence, and unease. The broader community experiences a complex mixture of awe, fear, and uncertainty during this period. Among the enslaved, hope and inspiration are tempered by anxiety, as the absence of their symbolic figure raises questions about vulnerability and continuity. Among the oppressors, fear mingles with frustration, as the inability to capture or subdue him undermines authority and fuels psychological tension. The narrative explores this duality, emphasizing that the fighter's withdrawal has strategic impact far beyond his physical location. It alters perception, reshapes social dynamics, and leaves a lingering psychological imprint that exceeds the scope of his direct actions. The cinematic portrayal underscores the tension of absence, showing how a legendary figure's retreat can have consequences equal to, if not greater than, those of visible engagement. The narrative gradually transitions to the final moments of the vanishing phase, focusing on the sense of unresolved mystery that surrounds the young fighter. His ultimate fate is left intentionally ambiguous. Some accounts suggest he escaped permanently, others hint at capture or death, and still others propose a life lived quietly in obscurity. The story emphasizes that this ambiguity is central to his enduring legend, creating a tension between known history and imagined possibility. The cinematic approach highlights shadows, half-seen figures, and fleeting movements, conveying the uncertainty and suspense that define this chapter. The audience is left with a profound sense of both closure and lingering curiosity, aware that the most powerful stories are often those that remain partially unseen, partially unknowable, and forever open to interpretation. By the end of this section, the audience fully grasps the magnitude of the young fighter's vanishing. His withdrawal is a strategic act, a psychological maneuver, and a narrative pivot that transforms him from a visible hero into a spectral, legendary figure whose presence is felt even in absence. Shadows stretch across familiar landscapes, whispers circulate through the community, and the tension of unresolved questions permeates every scene. The cinematic presentation underscores both the human and mythic dimensions of this phase, the interplay of survival, strategy, psychological mastery, and the haunting resonance of legend. The fighter's vanishing point is both literal and metaphorical, illustrating the ultimate mastery of presence, perception, and enduring influence in a world that sought to contain and suppress him. Years of relentless combat, constant scrutiny, and the weight of expectation began to exact a profound toll on the boy. While his legend grew, the reality of his existence became increasingly harsh and lonely. Injuries that once healed quickly now lingered, aches and bruises became constant companions, and the strain on his mind was as palpable as the strain on his body. He began to retreat from the public eye, avoiding crowds, and seeking solitude in quiet corners of the plantations or in hidden groves, where he could breathe without the oppressive gaze of onlookers. The narrative explores his psychological state in intimate detail. Moments of doubt, fear, and fleeting despair punctuate his otherwise stoic demeanor. Memories of childhood innocence clash with the brutality of his current life, creating a tension between who he once was and who necessity has forced him to become. Despite his isolation, the legend persists, and whispers of his continued survival follow him everywhere, intensifying the scrutiny whenever he reappears. Scenes depict fleeting interactions with allies and friends, moments that reveal his longing for connection, yet the boy remains trapped by the myth he embodies and the expectations it carries. The section contrasts cinematic visuals of empty landscapes, quiet nights, and desolate arenas with the chaotic intensity of past battles, emphasizing both the loneliness of extraordinary survival and the heavy burden of being immortalized in legend. By the end, the audience sees a figure both heroic and tragically human, teetering on the edge between endurance and collapse, as the myth continues to grow even while the boy himself becomes increasingly fragile. The aftermath of the boy who defied fate is a story not only of legend but of lingering mystery, echoing through generations and leaving an indelible mark on history, memory, and culture. This section begins by exploring how communities that witnessed his feats processed the events and the impact they left behind. Empty arenas, abandoned training grounds, and quiet villages become silent monuments to his extraordinary life. Eyewitnesses, descendants, and local storytellers recall moments with vivid detail, their memories blending awe, fear, and admiration. Some accounts are factual, focusing on precise victories and records of his battles, while others have become shrouded in legend, myth, and exaggeration, highlighting the tension between historical accuracy and narrative memory. The narrative delves into how the boy's story spread beyond the immediate community. Travelers carried tales of his victories, exaggerating feats and crafting myths that blurred the line between reality and legend. Songs, stories, and oral histories immortalized him, each retelling emphasizing a different aspect of his character: the fearless fighter, the unbroken child, the symbol of resilience, and the human being subjected to unimaginable cruelty. The blending of fact and fiction creates a haunting narrative texture, inviting reflection on how legends are born from the interplay of truth, perception, and imagination. Scholars, historians, and early writers attempt to dissect his life, debating the reality of his extraordinary strength and endurance. They measure, theorize, and interpret, attempting to explain feats that seem to defy the known limits of human capability. Some focus on anatomy, nutrition, and early forms of physical training, while others explore psychological resilience, strategic thinking, and mental fortitude. Despite these efforts, no single explanation accounts fully for his accomplishments. This tension between empirical observation and folklore underscores the enduring mystery surrounding his life and the reasons why some human stories refuse to be fully understood. The section also explores the moral and social dimensions of his story. While the boy's victories inspire awe, they also highlight the cruelty and exploitation inherent in the society that forced him into combat. The narrative examines the duality of admiration and unease. The boy is celebrated for his resilience and heroism, yet his life reflects systemic oppression, the brutality of slavery, and the way extraordinary talent can be exploited for entertainment and social control. Cinematic descriptions bring these contrasts to life, portraying both the exhilaration of public spectacles and the private toll of relentless combat, injuries, and psychological strain. Cultural resonance is a key theme in this expanded section. His story becomes a symbol of endurance, defiance, and the human spirit's capacity to survive against impossible odds. Communities commemorate him in songs, tales, and artistic works, while historians continue to probe his life, attempting to reconcile myth with reality. The narrative emphasizes how memory transforms into legend. The boy who never fell exists not only in historical records but also in the collective imagination, shaping cultural identity, moral reflection, and a fascination with human limits. The cinematic storytelling emphasizes atmosphere and emotional resonance, evoking the boy's presence even in absence. Empty arenas, lingering shadows, and a faint echo of vanished crowds create a sense of haunting continuity. Visuals of abandoned chains, sun-dappled training grounds, and quiet villages reinforce the sense that his influence persists in every space he once inhabited. Through these images, the audience feels the lasting weight of his presence, the enduring fascination with his life, and the haunting question of how one individual could achieve feats that seemed impossible. The narrative also addresses contemporary interpretations of his story. Modern audiences dissect his feats through documentaries, scholarly research, and cultural analysis, yet the more they seek to explain him, the more elusive he becomes. This reflects a central tension, the human desire to categorize and rationalize versus the persistence of phenomena that defy explanation. The boy's story embodies this tension, becoming a lens through which to examine human potential, resilience, and the power of storytelling. In its conclusion, the section emphasizes emotional resonance and lingering mystery. The boy's life and legend persist not merely as historical fact but as a symbol of courage, endurance, and the blurred line between human ability and myth. Fading footprints, empty chains glinting in sunlight, and echoes of past cheers evoke the enduring presence of a figure larger than life. His story endures in memory, imagination, and cultural consciousness, illustrating that some legends survive because they resonate with universal truths about survival, bravery, and the limits of human potential. The final moments leave the audience with profound reflection. The boy who never fell is immortalized as a figure whose legacy continues to captivate, challenge, and inspire. His life demonstrates the extraordinary capacity of the human spirit to endure, survive, and leave a lasting imprint on the world. The story closes on a contemplative, haunting note. The legend of the fighter lives on in the spaces he once walked, the stories that echo through generations, and the imagination of every observer, ensuring that his feats, courage, and resilience remain unforgettable. The story reaches its reflective and haunting conclusion as the young fighter has long since grown into legend, a figure whose feats of strength, cunning, and resilience have been etched into the collective memory of those who witnessed him and those who heard the whispers. His life, defined by defiance against chains both literal and metaphorical, leaves a trail of awe, speculation, and unanswered questions. The narrative opens with the echo of his most famous victories, the 37 men he reportedly bested, each confrontation a testament not merely to physical skill but to strategic genius and mental resilience. Yet even in recounting these accomplishments, the story emphasizes what cannot be measured, the psychological impact of a life lived constantly in opposition to overwhelming forces, the fear he inspired, and the hope he ignited. These elements combine to create a legacy that is as mysterious as it is formidable, lingering in the air like a shadow that refuses to dissipate. Communities remember him in different ways. Among the enslaved, he becomes almost mythological, a symbol of resistance that transcends the limitations of his physical body. Songs, stories, and parables circulate in hushed tones, recounting feats that sometimes verge on impossibility. One tale speaks of a night when he allegedly faced 5 men at once and emerged unscathed, using their own strength and momentum against them with uncanny foresight. Another recounts how he reportedly escaped chains that seemed designed to contain him, an act so precise and clever that observers could only shake their heads in disbelief. The narrative emphasizes that these stories are not merely fanciful, they are reflections of collective admiration and encoded wisdom, reminding each listener of the possibility of endurance, cunning, and the triumph of will against oppression. Among plantation owners and overseers, his legacy is tinged with fear, resentment, and incomprehension. To them, he is a symbol of the unpredictability and subversive potential of those they sought to dominate. Letters, journals, and fragmented accounts suggest that many feared him long after he ceased to be a direct threat, speaking of the psychological imprint left by someone who defied both expectation and control. The narrative explores this duality. The same acts that inspired awe among the oppressed provoked anxiety and attempts at erasure among those who wielded power. The cinematic portrayal of these reactions highlights the tension between admiration and terror, underscoring the complex, multi-layered nature of his influence on both sides of the social divide. Historians and chroniclers struggle to piece together his life with precision. Much of what is recorded comes from oral histories, fragmented documents, and second-hand accounts, creating a tapestry woven from both fact and legend. The narrative delves into the challenge of separating myth from reality, presenting scenes where researchers uncover conflicting testimonies. Some depict him as nearly superhuman, while others emphasize his human vulnerability, injuries, and the personal cost of his defiance. This ambiguity amplifies the intrigue surrounding his life, leaving audiences with the sense that while his feats can be celebrated, the full measure of his existence remains partially obscured, like shadows flickering at the edge of memory. Questions of morality, strategy, and survival dominate reflections on his life. How did he choose his battles? To what extent did he balance calculated risk with instinct? The narrative examines the psychological complexity underlying his actions, highlighting moments where victories were as much the result of foresight and patience as of raw strength. Observers speculate on his ability to understand opponents' motivations, predict reactions, and manipulate outcomes to his advantage. The cinematic retelling emphasizes that legend is rarely just about physical accomplishment, it is also about perception, intelligence, and the psychological mastery that allows a person to operate several steps ahead of those around them. The story also addresses the emotional and spiritual toll of a life spent in constant opposition. Even as he garnered admiration and carved a path of legend, the young fighter endured isolation, fear, and the ever-present threat of death or punishment. The narrative explores intimate reflections on loneliness, the burden of expectation, and the quiet moments of doubt that accompanied each triumph. Scenes portray him observing the faces of those he protected, the wary respect of allies, and the silent resentment of adversaries, highlighting the complex interplay of relationships that shaped his experience. Through these contemplative moments, the story conveys that even extraordinary figures are deeply human, capable of vulnerability, fatigue, and introspection amidst their accomplishments. The impact of his life on subsequent generations is profound. Communities, inspired by his resilience, adopt his tactics of cunning and perseverance in both overt and subtle forms of resistance. Oral histories preserve the memory of his clever strategies, his tactical ingenuity, and his unwavering courage, passing them to those who would face oppression in the decades that follow. The narrative emphasizes that his influence extends far beyond individual victories. He becomes a symbol, a moral and psychological touchstone, a template for defiance and ingenuity in environments designed to suppress autonomy and strength. The cinematic tone underscores the weight of this intergenerational impact, framing the fighter as a catalyst for both practical lessons and symbolic inspiration. Despite his legendary status, many elements of his life remain unresolved or mysterious. Scholars debate the exact number of men he defeated, the precise circumstances of his most famous confrontations, and even the full scope of his early training. Artifacts, letters, and fragmentary accounts provide tantalizing glimpses but rarely definitive answers. The narrative dwells on these uncertainties, creating suspense and an air of haunting ambiguity. By highlighting what is unknown alongside what is celebrated, the story reinforces a central theme: the full measure of human potential, and human courage, cannot always be captured in records or stories. It exists, at least in part, in the gaps, in the echoes, and in the imagination of those who remember. The story further explores the ethical and philosophical dimensions of his legacy. How should society remember figures who operated in morally complex circumstances? The young fighter's actions were both survival mechanisms and strategic choices that sometimes placed him in morally ambiguous positions. The narrative examines the tension between survival, justice, and the pressures of systemic oppression, inviting reflection on the cost of defiance and the ethical calculus required in extreme circumstances. These considerations add depth to the story, elevating it beyond mere recounting of feats into an exploration of character, morality, and human resilience. His influence is also evident in folklore and cultural memory. In songs, parables, and tales, he is often depicted as larger than life, a figure who could anticipate danger, manipulate opponents, and endure what seemed impossible. Yet these stories coexist with accounts emphasizing his humanity, the pain, fear, and doubt he endured alongside his remarkable achievements. The narrative explores this duality, showing how legend and reality intertwine to create a figure who is at once inspirational and relatable. The cinematic portrayal of this interplay underscores the emotional resonance of his life. Audiences are invited to marvel, to empathize, and to reflect on the extraordinary potential within ordinary circumstances. In the wider historical context, the young fighter's life challenges assumptions about strength, strategy, and resistance within oppressive systems. The narrative situates his experiences against the backdrop of slavery, systemic violence, and social hierarchy, emphasizing that his achievements are remarkable not merely for their physicality, but for their navigation of complex, hostile, and morally fraught environments. Scholars, historians, and descendants grapple with understanding how he achieved feats that seem to defy possibility, blending instinct, learned strategy, and psychological insight to emerge as a symbol of resilience. This context enriches the narrative, highlighting the intersection of individual agency and structural constraints in shaping a legendary life. The story closes with an evocative meditation on the lingering questions his life leaves behind. What were the full limits of his strength, strategy, and ingenuity? How much of his legend has been altered by retelling, and how much represents the raw truth of his capabilities? The narrative emphasizes that part of the power of his legacy lies in these very uncertainties, the spaces between documented fact and oral memory, between observed action and imagination. The cinematic tone lingers on the shadows of his life, suggesting that the most enduring legends are those that remain partially unseen, compelling each generation to imagine, reinterpret, and find meaning in what survives. In the final moments, the young fighter's legacy is framed as simultaneously inspiring and haunting. He is a figure of hope for those oppressed, a puzzle for historians, and a reminder of the enduring complexity of human courage and ingenuity. Shadows stretch across the landscape of memory, whispers echo through cabins and fields, and the audience is left with a sense of awe and reflection. The story closes on the idea that legends, while rooted in reality, are amplified by uncertainty, leaving an indelible mark on history, culture, and the imagination. Even decades later, the questions remain: how did one person, born in chains, defeat 37 men and never fall? How much of what we know is truth, and how much is myth? These unanswered questions are part of the legacy, ensuring that the fighter's story will endure, provoke reflection, and inspire those who seek courage in the face of impossible odds. The final section delves deeply into the enduring impact of the boy who defied fate, exploring how his story reverberated through generations, communities, and collective memory. The narrative opens with vivid and haunting imagery: empty arenas where dust still lingers, abandoned chains left as silent witnesses to battles long past, and quiet villages where whispers of his extraordinary feats persist in every corner. Historians, storytellers, and descendants offer fragmented accounts, blending documented facts with mythic embellishments, showing how his legend has been preserved, transformed, and amplified over time. Some claim he was touched by divine forces or endowed with an extraordinary strength inherited from ancestors, others attempt rational explanations, citing physics, anatomy, and observation of human endurance. This tension between myth and reality highlights the mysterious aura surrounding him, emphasizing that his life cannot be fully rationalized or explained. The section examines how his legend shaped communities and influenced generations. Villagers and later observers remember him as a symbol of resilience, defiance, and the human spirit's capacity to endure suffering. Yet alongside admiration, there is moral unease. The narrative reflects on the cruelty of the world that forced a child into relentless combat, the societal exploitation behind every victory, and the emotional and physical toll that often went unnoticed. Cinematic descriptions amplify this duality: the slow creak of aged doors in abandoned structures, shadows moving across empty arenas as if replaying past battles, and distant echoes of cheers that have long since faded. These details evoke the sense that his presence lingers in the very spaces he once inhabited, leaving an imprint on memory and environment alike. Each retelling reinforces his status as both a hero and an enigma, a figure whose story resists simple categorization and invites continual reinterpretation. Modern fascination with his life and legend continues to thrive. Documentaries, scholarly discussions, and creative interpretations attempt to dissect the balance between his extraordinary physical feats and the myth that grew around them. Despite this scrutiny, definitive explanations remain elusive. Audiences and researchers alike ask the same haunting questions: how did he endure 37 opponents without falling? Was it sheer skill, strategy, and resilience, or did society's imagination amplify his feats into legend? This section emphasizes that the power of his story lies not only in his accomplishments but in the profound way it captures human imagination, inspiring reflection on courage, endurance, and the limits of possibility. The narrative also explores the psychological and cultural resonance of his legacy. For communities he left behind, his story became a cautionary tale, a source of inspiration, and a shared myth that reinforced values of perseverance and resistance. For historians and scholars, his life presents an irresistible puzzle, challenging assumptions about human ability and the interplay between truth and narrative. Through layered storytelling, the section conveys how legends form, persist, and evolve, shaped as much by collective memory as by actual events. The boy's life is shown to inhabit both the tangible, his documented victories, surviving witnesses' accounts, physical marks of his existence, and the intangible, stories, folklore, and the awe he inspired that continues to echo centuries later. Cinematic imagery pervades this section, emphasizing atmosphere and emotional resonance. Visuals include empty training grounds bathed in fading sunlight, chains glinting silently in corners, and quiet villages where children reenact his moves without fully understanding why. Sounds of wind through abandoned arenas, the creaking of wooden floors, and the distant murmur of unseen crowds evoke the lingering presence of a figure larger than life. This approach reinforces the duality of his legend, the boy who existed in flesh and blood, and the hero who inhabits the imagination. The audience is drawn into a sensory experience that blends history, memory, and myth, allowing them to feel both the reality and the spectral traces of his existence. Reflection on moral, social, and philosophical implications is woven throughout. The story highlights the intersection of heroism and exploitation, endurance and suffering, reality and myth. The boy's life is positioned as a lens through which to explore human resilience, societal injustice, and the ways stories shape cultural memory. His legend transcends time, becoming a symbol of courage in the face of impossible odds, a reminder of the cost of survival, and an enduring narrative that provokes both admiration and contemplation. The section closes with deeply evocative imagery that leaves the audience with a lingering sense of awe and wonder. The boy who never fell is immortalized in footprints fading into the horizon, empty chains glinting in sunlight, and faint echoes of cheers blending with whispers of disbelief and reverence. His life and legend occupy a liminal space between history and myth, tangible achievement and intangible inspiration. The narrative emphasizes that some stories endure not merely because of their factual accuracy but because they capture imagination, provoke reflection, and embody ideals of courage, resilience, and human potential. The boy's legacy is portrayed as both eternal and elusive, a figure whose story continues to haunt, inspire, and intrigue long after the last witness has vanished. By the end, viewers are left with an emotional, contemplative resonance. The narrative underscores that extraordinary human feats cannot always be fully understood, and that the boy's story is immortal not just in record but in memory, myth, and imagination. His life serves as a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure unimaginable challenges, to transform suffering into legend, and to leave an enduring mark on the world, one that continues to captivate, challenge, and inspire generations long after the final fight has ended. The section closes on a note of quiet, haunting reflection, ensuring that the boy who never fell remains an eternal enigma in the hearts and minds of all who hear his story.